Why is this around the wrong way? I'm holding my cup in this hand, but it's over there in the other hand, in the image that's fed back to me. Oh, I can't get my head around this. Oh, this is bizarre. Okay, let's just move along, shall we? Oh, woo, the image is around the wrong way. Good morning, everybody. I am going to talk about preparing our children for the real world when they have a PDA profile of autism. So many parents will ask me, how do we prepare our children for the real world where they'll be expected to work and to attend appointments? It's well and good for us to create an environment that is flexible for them at home, but how will that prepare them for real life? So let's talk about that. Let's talk about what we really mean when we say real life. So I have an autistic brain, which means I'm going to completely deconstruct that. Not enough coffee. I'm going to completely deconstruct that. The real world, comparing someone for the real world or real life. Well, this is the real world now, and this is real life now, and our children are living in it now. So they're well aware of what the real world demands them to be, or expects them to be, and they find it really, really difficult already, or you wouldn't be seeing that communicated in their behaviour when they are demand avoidant or aggressive in their behaviour, or shutting down or burning out when they're autistic. So what do we actually mean? What we mean when we say how do we prepare them for the real world is how do we have other people be as understanding and as accepting as we are for our children. And that is not the responsibility of our child. Our children have no responsibility or obligation to change the beliefs and the understandings and the perceptions of other people, especially adults. Our children come into this world just as who they are, and as parents, we find ways to tune into who our children are and to provide a life that is aligned with their neurotype. Now, if we look at generations gone by where that hasn't happened, that's reflected in our statistics on mental health for autistic people today, where autistic people are 16 times more likely to commit suicide, 4 times more likely to experience depression or anxiety or mental illness. This is indicative of generations gone by being unsupported, being misunderstood. And, I had a client this morning and we were discussing the pressures that the generations before us have been under, particularly in gender stereotypes. This is reflected in our current understandings, and it's up to us as parents and as adults to stand up and speak our truth and stand in our authentic autistic expression, whether that be a PDA expression or not, whether we identify as neurotypical and we're parenting autistic children. It's up to us to stand in our truth and to speak about our children's challenges and their strengths openly so that we can change perceptions, so that we no longer ask the question, how do I prepare my child for the real world? Because again, this is the real world, and we have every opportunity to help people understand our children. And when they don't, that's okay. We're not obligated to do anything about that, but walk away and find communities and people who are supportive and understanding. I've written notes. I just don't do notes because I find them really distracting, but I also have an ADHD brain, so if I don't do notes, I'll forget. How cool is my shirt, by the way? Trust in your source. Not as in source of information, as in source who you are. See, ADHD moment. Negotiables versus non-negotiables. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we handle PDA in my family in terms of consequences and behaviour. Now, in my approach, I don't talk about behaviour management because behaviour isn't something that just happens because a child is naughty. I don't believe in that. Behaviour is a communication or an external expression of something going on in here that's been. In our home, my husband and I sit together regularly, whether that's a night where the children are in bed or a daytime when they're at school, and we talk about our current challenges in our entire family. So we might have one child who's experiencing anxiety and finding it difficult to get to school. We might have another child who all of a sudden has begun to attack their sibling, whether that be verbally or physically. It can be absolutely anything that neurodivergent families contend with. We look at the challenges, our current challenges, and we have a really good conversation about what might be going on. And we have these conversations with our children as well. But when we have behaviours that compromise the safety of other members of the family, we make a list and we have one side called negotiables and one side called non-negotiables. Negotiables might be when our child continuously gets out of bed at night, and we have a lot of acceptance around that because that's an expression of anxiety and needing to be reassured consistently, and some nights we won't have a child getting out of bed a lot. A negotiable would be when our child asks if they can sleep in our bed, we're happy to negotiate on that. Someone can hop in bed with them and sleep, or they can sleep in our bed. We can negotiate with our child. A non-negotiable is harming another member of our family or another person. A non-negotiable means that it's not acceptable. Now, of course, where there are particular behaviours, there's not always choice behind it. And we are absolutely accepting and understanding of that. So an example may be our 8-year-old lashing out and hitting our 5-year-old because she's feeling really frustrated and she's asked her sister over and over to give her space and she's not getting it, so she uses her body to communicate rather than her mouth or her speech device. Now, because it's a non-negotiable to harm other members of the family, whether the behaviour is a choice or not doesn't impact the outcome for the other person on the receiving end. So there's still an outcome, and that is that the sibling's been hurt or another person has been harmed. So we do address this, but we don't use punishment. Now, it's important to understand the difference between consequences and punishment. A consequence is just a follow-on result from an event or a situation, or in this case, a behaviour. A lot of people align the word consequence with punishment because it's used in the world of behaviour management in that way. When I talk about consequence, I mean this thing is naturally now going to happen because of what has happened over here. So we talk to our child about, we remind them, I'm sorry you're feeling really upset right now. I understand. So we show them empathy. We talk to them about what's happened. I know it's really awful to feel that angry. It's frustrating when people don't listen to us. We also talk to her sibling about how this event came about and what we might do differently in the future. But then we'll say, it's now a time for you to find something that's going to make you feel okay. Do you need to sit in your room and find some calm using your iPad, cuddling your teddy? Can I give you a cuddle? But for now, we need to take ourselves somewhere else. That's my adult daughter calling me from overseas during a live. Sorry about that. For now, we need to take ourselves to a place that is away from the rest of the family to keep them safe. Because as your mummy, I have a really important job, and that is to keep everybody safe all of the time. So what do you need right now to feel okay? Now, sometimes that might result in more aggression, and sometimes it won't. I find that when we're transparent and we communicate authentically, we show concern, we show empathy and understanding rather than anger and reaction. We are being responsive caregivers rather than reacting from a space of panic and anger. And often we'll give choices about what we can do now. We can go to our room, like I said, we can go to our room and use our screen to regulate. We don't have restrictions on screens in our house, and we also don't have problems with overuse. You can go outside and swing on the swing. You can have a bath with some bubble bath, whatever it is that you need to do. But you've hurt another person, and that's not okay. That's not how we deal with our anger. Now, this will be different for every single family, because I know that there will be people watching saying that would not work with my child, and I get it. I totally get it. It's about being creative. It's about really tuning into what works for your family. I want to talk a little bit about natural consequences. So not imposed consequences that I just spoke about then, but natural consequences. I remember being at my sister's house with my 5-year-old one time, and she had a bowl of lollies on the counter. And my 5-year-old said to my sister, "Can I have a lolly?" And my sister said yes, and my 5-year-old started eating these lollies. Now, after some time, and I was aware that she was eating a lot of lollies, and I said, you know, we always talk about if we eat too many of those, we might get a pain in the tummy. And she would say, being a PDA, "I don't care," and that's okay, fine. So what we do is we remember that our children are autodidactic, so they're self-led in their learning, which also extends to natural consequences. They are self-led in their learning around negative experience as well. And I can tell you now, being a PDA, it didn't matter what my mother said to me. It didn't matter what anybody said to me about what might happen or what was going to happen to stop me from engaging in something that was risky. I would do it anyway. And until I had the experience, this negative experience or this negative consequence, that's when I would learn. My learning was always applied. It was always experiential. Autistic people are by nature experiential learners. We learn through experience before we learn through someone telling us what might happen. So my 5-year-old continued to eat the lollies, and my sister said after some time, "Are you just going to let her keep eating these lollies? She's going to make herself sick." And I sat back and I thought, gosh, I remember being that way as a parent. I remember telling my children, "That's enough, no more, no, you can't have any more," and them not coping because they were PDAs and I didn't know, and then we'd have a blowout and the whole family would be stressed, and then there'd be tension between my husband and I, and we'd be arguing and the children would be upset just from that one incident. So what I do instead now is I create a flexible environment. If my child eats lollies to the point where she vomits, then that's the experience she needs to have to learn her limits. And I know to many adults this concept would seem foreign, but with children with pathological demand avoidance, sometimes our choice is taken away in that. Because when we impose limitations or restrictions, our children will compensate, meaning they will find another way to regain their control, whether that means taking it out on their sibling or kicking a window or doing something else to compensate. So, natural consequences and self-led learning. Collaborative problem solving. So always when our children engage in behaviours that are harmful to either themselves or other people, having a discussion with them about it, not there and then, never there and then, much later on when we're in a good space. Now here's the thing about raising neurodivergent children. Sitting across the table having a family meeting doesn't work well for many families. It doesn't work well in our family. It's confronting. It is a demand for PDAs. It feels forceful, and it feels like a violation to me as a PDA. It's much better to go for a walk together where we're not making eye contact, go for a bike ride, play a video game together, jump on the PlayStation and play a game together, do some art and craft, kick a footy in the backyard, do anything that creates an environment where we are not face to face, looking at each other in the eyeballs, that's intense. So we want something that feels distracting, but remembering that autistic people, we tend to learn better when our attention is able to be focused on something else. So in a classroom, I would doodle, I would scribble so I could listen. If I had to look at my teacher while they were talking, I couldn't take the information in because I could only engage one sense at a time. Mary Rose says, what about if natural consequences don't work? So Mary Rose, you may have joined us a little bit later. I began the conversation by addressing that, talking about some of the strategies that we use at home. I hate the word strategies because it's dishonest. It feels dishonest. Some of the ways that we work with our children's behavioural communication at home before natural consequences. Can't remember what I was talking about now. Collaborative problem solving. Now, talking through the outcome. Oh, yeah, sorry. So finding an activity to both engage in and then talking about what happened. It's much more comfortable for us to do that because it's less threatening and it's non-direct. So it feels more comfortable. Talking through the outcome. Children with a PDA profile, you know, autistic children, children with ADHD, whatever the neurodivergence is. For me as an autistic person, as an ADHDer, as a PDA, it's easy for me to disconnect from a previous experience that I've had. And so sometimes I need reminders. I need to remember what happened, how did I feel before I engage in it again. So I will often say to my children, I can see that you are really angry right now, and I get it, and it feels crap when we're that angry. But let's think about this. You're going to be angry, and you're going to insert behaviour here. I'm going to feel really upset about that. Your sister is going to feel frightened of the sound. That's going to take my attention away, and I'm going to have to spend all afternoon with her, calming her down. And you're going to be alone in your room, calming down. So we're not making threats. It's not about threatening our children. It's about reminding them of how this scene plays out when it takes place. Another example is when our children don't want to brush their teeth. Sorry, it's not about don't want to, it's about cannot. So they're avoiding the demand of brushing their teeth. Sometimes I find it helps to find YouTube videos of what happens when we don't take care of our teeth, or what happens when we don't do A, B, or C. Now, none of what I'm saying is guaranteed to create change within families. And above anything, I prioritise and always promote tuning into our children's neurotype, not trying to change it. So again, when parents ask me, how do I prepare my PDA child for the real world? What we are really asking is, how do we change other people so that they just treat our children with respect and accept them? So again, we're not to hold our children responsible for changing themselves to make other people feel comfortable. That's not what this is about. Meltdown is past. Return talking at that point will only escalate the meltdown. That's exactly right. Less talk and allow for space. No demand or redirection or consequence will help. It's not until after the child has calmed down and reached a level of balance can the behaviour situation be addressed. Exactly, Kylie, which is what I've said. You know, when our child has already reached the point where they are distressed or raging or upset, talking is the last thing we want to do. That's why we wait until another time when we're in an environment where we're engaging in an activity together and we're not sitting across the table from each other, eyeballing each other. Something that's really important to remember is, you know, living in the moment. Remembering our children are children and not projecting into the future. Something that I will forever regret is that when the first of my 4 children was diagnosed as autistic, I wasted away those most precious and beautiful years of her life worrying about her future. And I missed engaging and connecting with my beautiful child and learning about her. When we live in the moment, when we engage with our children as who they are without trying to change them or freaking out about their future, that provides us an opportunity to really get to know who they are, to help them channel their strengths. And you know, I was an aggressive child. I spent some time not being able to talk at school, and then other times I was aggressive. If somebody upset me or things didn't go my way, I would resort to violence. I didn't make it all the way through school. I left at 15 because I was consistently placed on behavioural modification programs. I was isolated in school. I had a teen pregnancy. I ended up homeless. I've talked about this a lot. Today, I have a couple of degrees. That's not important, but for some people it is. I own my own business and I'm happy and thriving, and I have a beautiful family and a beautiful social network and a beautiful community. So sometimes it's important to trust in the process as well. And again, trusting in experiential learning. There are a lot of experiences that I have had in my life that have helped me to develop the determination that I have today as an adult and push me further in life and help me to know what I don't want. I want to finish on this. PDA is a disability. Pathological demand avoidance, subtype of autism, is a disability. Autism is a disability. If it interferes with our daily life, if it prevents us from being able to engage with things that we want for ourselves, that other people can do with ease. It's a disability. Employers, academic institutions, schools, educational institutions are legally required to provide accommodations for people with disabilities. Now, we all know that this doesn't always happen. We all know that this doesn't always happen. We know how many families are fighting for that to happen. We know how many families are withdrawing their children from schools because it's not happening. But our children are not responsible for this. Our children are children, again, born as who they are. And PDA has these incredible strengths as well. But remembering, when we're talking about how will my child cope in the workplace, think about a wheelchair user. You know, how will a wheelchair user cope in a workplace? Well, then we would expect accommodations and we would fight for them when we didn't have them. We wouldn't sit them at the bottom of a staircase and tell them about the importance of walking up the stairs. You know, we've got to remember this is a disability. It is a disability. Our children have the right to be accommodated, to be understood. There are legal requirements for this to happen. So if you need an advocate to help you in whatever system you're in with your child, then I'd encourage you to source one. Rather than us taking on the responsibility of changing our children for them to succeed in the world, you know, we should be enjoying our children and thriving in family life. Every strategy, every approach, every belief, every perception is going to change from person to person and family to family. We all have things that are important that change from family to family as well. But I think it's really important to remember that it is not a child's responsibility to be normalized or to normalize themselves rather than actualize themselves. So we support our children to be who they are, and we seek out supportive environments for them. I've got some questions over here. What are your thoughts on NVR? Sorry, Harry, I'm not sure what NVR is. Teaching a child to prepare for the future is teaching them copying tools and self-advocacy. Coping tools and self-advocacy? Yes, that's right. But there's a difference between teaching a child to prepare for the future and changing a child to prepare for people who don't accept them. There's a huge difference. Okay, once again, I've talked for nearly half an hour. Thank you everybody for being here. And I'll be back again next week. Ciao!